Welcome to Technology Tangents. We get leaders together to discuss the important tech of today and the implications for tomorrow. Our discussions are fun, lighthearted, and frankly opinionated, but hopefully gives you a sense of what matters, what to pay attention to, and what to ignore. Hello, Jason. Hello, Kevin. How are you guys today?
Happy Friday.
It is a Friday.
Hi.
Hello. Where are you joining us today, Kevin? This is not your normal background sitting next to us in this room. Did we scare you away last time or what?
I am in my childhood home sitting in my father's office. And so I'm coming from Wisconsin, so excited to be up here. Decided it was a little hot in Dallas this week. And a balmy 65 degree or 55 degrees this morning. So I'm enjoying that. And we'll be up here for the holiday weekend.
That's awesome.
I was in Chicago all the Monday to Thursday this week. And Vincent called me yesterday. He's like, how's Chicago? I'm like, it's 65 degrees. It's awesome.
Don't think I'll ever come back.
I got off the plane. I'm like, back in Dallas.
It was definitely hot here.
Yeah.
I was actually
where were you this week? Yeah,
I was actually in Germany this week. So in Frankfurt and Stuttgart, giving a talk at a large auto company. And it was also quite nice relative to Dallas this week. It's funny because Dallas actually was really quite calm all spring and summer. It was really quite comfortable, and it seems like we've now flipped a switch and we're back to true Dallas summer, which is hot. So enjoy the nice cool weather there. I want to do something a little different today, partly because I'm maybe jet lagged, partly because I didn't prepare as much as I would have liked to, which is let's just keep it a bit more conversational than we do oftentimes and just sort of see what happens with the conversation, and we'll read the comments, and maybe it's terrible and we'll never do it again. And Sarah will delete all episodes where we try this, but I don't know, something to do. One of the things I want to just kick off the conversation though is, like I said, I've given a keynote at this sort of large AI event this week. And of course they were all excited about AI. There were lots of great speakers there. I brought up the point early on in that talk that most AI projects really fail to deliver the outcomes that were promised. 85% or more really fail to deliver the outcomes. And we had people from Google there, and they talked a little bit about why that is, what from their perspective. I certainly shared some of why I think it is. But I want to just kick off with this challenge of how do you ultimately get out of pilot purgatory? That is, lots of companies, virtually every enterprise company today has done at least a dozen, probably more, pilots of generative AI these days. And they really haven't gotten many of those to production, arguably none in many cases. BCG was just quoted in an article this week saying that most of their clients don't have anything in production. Google said the same thing in their talk when they were up there. Most of their clients don't have stuff actually in production. My question to you guys is what does that mean? Jason, from a technology standpoint, why is that? What are the challenges that people have to face? And from a strategy standpoint, Kevin, does this change the sort of underlying thesis in your mind, the investment thesis? Again, money's still expensive. Maybe that rate comes down. Maybe there's some optimism there. Do you take that sort of different risk profile at the moment, given that your competitors aren't really getting into production? You're not getting into production. Money's still expensive. Do I wait and just see? Or do you continue to lean into that? Curious from your guys' hot sports opinions, if you will.
Well, I have several, but can you turn up my mic, my headphones just a minute? I can't hear you very well. Sorry, thanks. I'd say for one, there are probably a bunch of prototypes and POCs that shouldn't go into production. That's why we do them, right? Is we find out which ones, not all ideas are good ideas, most ideas are bad ideas. Let's find out the good ones and move those into production. Let's kill the bad ones. But I suspect that is not the problem that we're having, right? Or that people are having. And I'm going to take this maybe in a weird direction, but my guess or belief around a lot of that is because we don't actually take time to define the measurement, and we don't have good measurement processes that are production ready as well. I mean, you used to work at Microsoft and run the Office Analytics. You ran how many experiments?
10,000 a month.
10,000 experiments a month. Right. That's a culture of small experiments. Like, we're not going to do these massive, 3-month long projects. Like, we're going to do small experiments. We're going to have systems structured where we can vary this tiny bit and try it out. But then we had the systems and the people to really measure that and see if it actually drives any results. And so my guess is because we don't approach things that way. We are approaching them as like big, massive, install ERP type projects, not like little, we're going to vary these things and determine where AI can add value. And then we're going to measure it and compare and do really good measurement. I mean, as you know, as a statistics person, and I don't know, I just know that it's really, really hard to design good experiments. That's your expertise, not mine. And people don't do that. And so you've got to take a different approach to this as how are these experiments? And then, build those experiments into production, right? Like you can't, pilot an experiment and get a really valid result usually. Yeah. Like you can prove that it maybe should be experimented with or shouldn't be experimented with. But that's kind of my thought on why you don't see that is you just don't treat it like it is an experiment in production and measure it, right? Design experiments and measure it.
Yeah, building on that, Jason, I think that's good insight. Yeah, my first question was I wrote down when you asked the question, Vincent, like what is production, which I think kind of goes back a little bit to Jason, what you're just saying is like, understanding how you would quantify what that even means. And then when I think about it more from a business perspective, my guess is that there's a couple dynamics at work. One is that we're seeing a lot of usage within personal productivity. And so how's that playing out in terms of how I do my day job in terms of research or creation or data analysis? Like there's a lot of that just being done we may have a hard time quantifying. And again, even both the usage, but also frankly, the impact of that, right? So that's one. I think the next step my mind goes to, it's really, how do we use generative AI techniques to evolve what we're already been doing in AI or other automation projects, right? Hey, we're going to update and change how our bot process was working or automated response systems and things. So, again, where is that line, which then ultimately leads to where I think the question maybe is, at least from my mind goes, when do we actually see purely autonomous creation occur? And when do you start seeing large scale usage and really, removing, the human capital element of that? And, obviously I don't quite have an answer for that, but my mind goes back a bit, Vincent, we've been selling together now for almost a decade and just like thinking about how long, we've been talking about some of these models and how long adoption took. And, I'm curious if, some of those sales things that we're talking a ton about 5, 6, 7 years ago, now are actually much more in, will that also just be the lag curve for AI where it's going to slowly kind of move into, particularly if we think about the different evolutions of types of AI and what we're seeing very much in the very sensational side of AI, generative AI today versus just really kind of how we use it to automate.
I think it's a good point. I definitely think it's going to be true to some degree. I want to pick up the thread that you started, Jason, around people have to think differently. I think there has to be cultural elements that has to change in terms of how you incent people to behave. And early days, Microsoft, when I was there, we didn't really even have appropriate telemetry on our software. I mean, this was the days before Office Online. This was before the days of any of that. It all sat fat clients on people's desktops behind a firewall. Even getting data out to figure out what people were doing was really a difficult thing. And if you went to a product manager or a GM and you said, hey, I really think that you should prioritize this. I really want you to actually invest the time to go get this logging done so I can do experiments, I can do analysis. It's a really difficult proposition because as a general manager, as a product manager, what are you held accountable to? Sales, usage, revenue, like
you've got a big, long roadmap of stuff you're supposed to deliver, and
that's right.
It's not logging and analytics for the data guys.
Exactly right. And again, like this is a feature that by definition, if done well, no end user will ever even know existed. Like they're not going to see any change in performance. They're not going to see any new functionality that comes out of that, at least not in the short term or even probably medium term. Now, longer term, certainly, we're going to prioritize things differently. We're going to give them the features they really want, the ones they really need in a quicker, more expeditious way. But it's a very difficult thing when you think about how people are typically incented.
Yeah, you're setting up, some foundational things to get the data to make those longer term decisions.
Exactly. And this is, I think, the same here today with generative AI. I mean, there's a lot of sort of groundwork that you have to do, and you have to create the right culture and the right incentives to allow that work to get done. I think that then ties closely to, I know you love this one, Kevin, Clayton Christensen around Innovator's Dilemma, which is that large incumbent organizations, enterprises, are amazing at squeezing every single drop out of a process, out of any kind of tool, out of just the business in terms of efficiencies. This is sort of intrinsically against that. These things have to be, in the early days at least, they have to be inefficient. They have to be sort of not the most optimal thing to do. We're going to create a lot of waste. In fact, I often say that if you look back at technology, these moments in time, the first mover in these spaces often dies. Like the first internet browser, Alfie, or actually World Wide Web was the first internet browser, sorry.
Or even Netscape.
Or even Netscape, even a second generation kind of died. The first smartphone, not here. First, go down the list, not here.
MySpace,
exactly, social network, not here. And so we sort of have to design these systems knowing that whatever we build today will not be the ultimate solution. And that, again, means that you're going to be wasting time and money and resources, at least as defined in the sort of narrowest definition of shareholder primacy. Quarterly numbers matter. What you deliver to my end users, what you sell tomorrow is what I care about the most. And that's really, really hard. And so it does require you to think differently. You have to think like a disruptor. And that means it's not just like prioritizing and creating skunk works teams, it's the team itself. And I think we had a great example today. You were discussing, we had somebody come in and you showed me this great example, Jason, where, today people play with these tools. And we've launched our own version internally, of course, and they play with them. And what do they do with them? They ask it kind of a dumb question and they get kind of a dumb answer. And they're like, yeah, whatever. I'm busy. I don't have time for this. It's not that important. Like, it made my email a little bit better. Don't care. It made my CPM self-reviews a little bit faster. Don't really care. They're not really prioritizing learning what it can do. You want to tell the example earlier? It was a great example.
Well, yes, I'll tell the example, but it's interesting my answer and Kevin's kind of highlight the two different ways people think about AI in the workplace. And it is two very different things. You and I think, are talking about one. Kevin's talking about another one. That example was what Kevin's talking about, which is there are, opportunities to use AI tools as an end user tool, like Excel. People wrote things down in ledgers and Excel came along, and now we have a better tool to track ledgers. There are tools that we can use internally. We use, Adobe to Photoshop to create images. Now we can use another tool to create, improve images, or features built into Photoshop to create images. And there's that usage, and there's value to be gained there through lower cost, higher efficiency. And then what you and I were talking about, though, is more around building AI, technologies into actual solutions for customers to use, into your actual products and products. And so I think those are two very different things. I think back to the strategy discussion we had a few weeks ago, like you have to account for both, right? And, now I'll answer your question. Yeah, we had Simon Soje, who's one of our partners here at Credera, had done all this incredible analysis and, had just uploaded some PDFs and given some data and asked some questions, and the GPT was able to not only pull and extract the data out of the PDFs, but it's also said hey, here's the formulas. Here's how I would do that analysis. Oh, by the way, here's some Python code to do it. And I'm going to run that. And here's a nice, really formatted table of all the examples. And it was really very impressive. It goes back to the, you ask a stupid question, you'll get a stupid answer. But if you ask a really intelligent question, you'll get a really intelligent answer in a lot of times. And so to me, that kind of stuff is around training and adoption. And, we have to expect people to use it, hold them accountable to using it. It's a change management issue. But you also have to train them on how to use it effectively and get good at it and get the results. And that's an ongoing iterative process. And so I think of that as just like anytime we roll out anything new, right? Internally, you roll out a new CRM, you've got to continually train people on like how to use the tool, how to get value, how to improve your usage, how to improve the tool, those kind of things. So, that's but the culture around being experimental to me is more around, a product that we would build. You're building an e-commerce solution. You want to introduce AI to, generate content for users. Well, we're going to use it to generate images. How do we know those images improve conversion or average cart size or whatever it is that we're trying to improve? Well, we have to measure those things. We have to do lots of little experiments. And I do think Jake Carter and I wrote a paper, a blog called, moving from project to product mindset. There's a lot of good books. Eric Ries has one on, moving towards a more product mindset where, you structure an organization to work on products, not project to project. And those products then have budget to then go do lots of different experiments. And that, I think that is a big, not just cultural, but kind of operational way of working for some companies, how you budget things and how resources are allocated to different, groups internally. And it seems like a lot to change, right? To say, well, that's a lot to change to see if some of this AI stuff works. But I would say you need to make those changes regardless of AI, right? We talk about just technology in general driving business result and the ability to deliver technology quickly, whether it's AI driven technology or something else. You need to be able to drive quickly. We've talked about the example of Home Depot when COVID shut down. They were able to build buy online, pick up in store, or pick up curbside. That was a whole new tablet app and a whole new process for people to get it and bring it outside, and all of that on the website as to what stores. Like, they rolled that out in 2 days. How many, I would challenge our listeners who are in charge of technology departments to decide if there was something like that. Could we roll out a complete new system in 2 days? But you need to be able to, because things change that fast. And so those are foundational things, kind of that product approach, continuous delivery, that need to be in place anyway. And so if you're not doing that, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition, right? But it is necessary. And then you have the infrastructure to do some of those experiment driven things.
Makes sense. I want to go back to this point of training though.
Okay.
I'm not entirely convinced. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are here. So I recently somebody sent me the 2009 Netflix deck recently, cultural elements, and one of them was really around curiosity, this idea of always lifelong learning, and sort of the corollary of, you could hire people like this. One of the corollaries is that you actually don't need governance. As a company, you need almost no rules. And people will just naturally do what's in the best interest of the company. That's kind of the thesis. What's their expense policy? Spend money like it's Netflix's, do what's in their best interest. End of story. What's their vacation policy? Take vacation. End of story. Like they've removed all of this. And they've really put the onus on the employee. So my question to you guys is, in this moment when everything is potentially changing, we've talked about how generative AI is a little bit unique in the sort of the breadth of the impact and the depth of impact within specific areas. If you don't have a company with employees that are naturally curious and naturally wanting to figure this out on their own and get past the sort of dumb questions, dumb answers, to the really interesting, insightful, helpful things of like deep mathematical analysis, which was that example he showed was really thoughtful analysis, and it made some interesting assumptions, which they called out, the model called out. He then said, hey, that assumption's not quite right. I won't get into the details, but I don't follow some of these assumptions. Here are some other graphs that show what the assumptions ought to be. The tool then actually analyzed those graphs, redid the math, and gave him a slightly different answer. I mean, that was curious. That wasn't training. That was like a raw curiosity in Simon as a human. Is that something that you can really train?
It is funny. That is actually the discussion we had when we were talking about it. He is going to be building some of the training, and I actually took that position. And he did have some good thoughts where it's like, well, yes, you may not be able to train people, in terms of like how to dig in, but you can at least tell them that they need to. And that was his point of the training, was like, we need to teach people like, hey, don't expect it to give just a simple answer. You've got to, walk through some examples to show them. And it wasn't so much that we're going to teach you how to be curious. It was that, it can do much more than you think. And so you can be curious, if that makes sense. And so I tend to be in your camp, but I'll trust Simon on this one.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to pivot a bit, and not ignoring the question around training, but this is a couple themes that I've been wrestling with that I think are also fitting this. Is really this concept of just busyness and productivity. And so I'm curious, and we've become as knowledge workers so busy, structured every single day. It's like, and so the idea of the curiosity in the midst of like even using something that will help make our day using, I know I'm still here on the personal productivity versus the more enterprise application. And I think that we just don't have the white space at all. And we don't prioritize it. We don't work through it. Again, nothing new, tons of writings, tons of papers, tons of working through this. And I think what's intriguing to me about this one though now is this, are we at a moment post-COVID, we kind of got back into it where the application of time and expectation is increased. Now you've got something that theoretically could really help you be creative, help you think how you could do this. And you're caught in this moment, but I don't have time to actually use the tools to help work through it. And I think so that where you can save a scenario here where we're using a partner who's thinking about that, all of a sudden, that becomes, wow, now my thinking time is rewarded by application of response back that I wouldn't have normally gotten there. I would have used to do it. And I think, so how we train that, how do we show that, how we tell those stories, I think that, or at least in our business, and maybe even more personally, my own personal, like that desire to create, that desire to think is often at conflict with just all the other stuff. And I think we have to decide as organizations, as individuals, where you want to do that. And if we can get there, if we can train there, and then all of a sudden you can start to use, whether it be learning how to do new AI-based tools, whether it be reading, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this that help make you better and frankly, just make you more enjoyable and really, I think, part of the human condition. And I think that's what I look at my role is, helping, and not so much, more my day job and how we help structure organizations. Like, I think really trying to think through, this is something we can give back, and actually how you expect people to do that, whether that be, in their job description, in that we celebrate, there's different ways to do this. Even the concept of, we're recording on a Friday afternoon and summer Fridays. And like, for me, this is energizing to do this on a Friday afternoon. For someone else, that may be a different thing that they want to go do at that time, but how do we reward that? Which, taking that construct of busyness as a gap, and now we bring it into it's interesting. And my other thing I've been thinking about, and again, I'm coming from the business side of the AI, not the tech that you guys live in, is this concept of like how we use AI infused business solutions. And so you're really kind of shifting from, I got to get me some AI. I don't know what that means. So I'll start there. I'll do some POCs and I'll start working through this, to now where we say, hey, no, we're taking our business processes and we're injecting AI into those things. So even as a professional service firm, we're selling those solutions. And this is how you would increase the car buying experience, or this is how you would launch a drug faster, or this is how you would have more effectiveness to what you use, right? You're not changing the business process. You're using the AI tools now that are at place. Again, commonsensical, classical acceleration using technology enablement, but it's different than the conversation of 6 months ago where it's like, I just need some AI. And I think that so, and then how does that tie back in? How do you structure it then as a company? Then maybe it comes back to, and you're in your individual areas of responsibility, you're looking at your core processes and how you work through that, how you think through that. Then if you're in the technology side of the equation, or you're working through, how do you really force that? The last thing I've just been thinking about as we've been talking here this afternoon is simply around, classic kind of strategy type, emails, red team, B team. Do we need to start bringing in on some of these scenario planning where we have to force groups to use and think about how they would use AI to change that thinking? And if it's not being done on the curiosity front, it's actually part of how you do your decision making and how you bring that into that context. And know, good, by the way, you can actually use AI to help you do those things too. And so, but I think that's going to come down. I hate the word mandate, but it may have to be some of that. And in this case, it's going to be, but we have to actually just bring that into our evaluation process always in terms of how you, how you evaluate tools, technologies, vendors. So,
yeah, I think it's good. I definitely agree with a lot of that. The part that I'm still just struggling with a little bit is like, can you mandate curiosity? Like go back to this Netflix deck. It's such a good deck, by the way. I hadn't read it in like a decade. It's just so good. You should go back and read it if you haven't recently. But his point is, as the bigger the company gets, as it gets bigger, everything becomes chaotic because nobody knows who's doing what, and you have a bunch of people huddling around the same football or same soccer ball or whatever the analogy is. I don't know sports. Sorry.
Bad content creation, or sorry.
Right, exactly. So what companies naturally do is they increase the amount of process. Like, process is great. It's really sort of this seductively strong near-term outcomes. Lots of process done well means you get more efficiencies. You need minimal thinking. Fewer mistakes are made. But it also means your sort of curious innovators, mavericks, if you will, start leaving. They get too frustrated by it. And the other problem that seems great at the short term is that those processes are really optimized for that market at that moment in time. And efficiency ultimately ends up trumping flexibility. And then his very next slide is basically, then the market shifts. And because you're unable to adapt, because you've sort of sacrificed all of this flexibility for a really very efficient process, you're unable to adapt quickly. And the employees, the people that you've then cultivated in that time, are the people who actually really like the process. They're really good at the process. And it sort of aligns to the value systems you've created in that organization. And therefore, the company often grinds painfully into irrelevance. And that is my sort of core question is, if your company today is very successful and you've hired people who thrive in that company, in that process-driven, do it this way, even if you mandated, hey, you must use AI to help do your job differently in this spot. Take your current process, so let's just choose an easy one, and we'll pick on marketers because they're the easiest and most picked on these days. You write a subject line, okay, great. Take that subject line you just wrote, put it in some AI, get 10 different variants of it, choose the best one. Awesome. We'll get some efficiencies from that. We'll get slightly better subject lines from it. We'll have it localize it. Terrific. To me, you're still going to grind into irrelevance because you've missed the point. The point is not that you can have 1 or 2 or 10 or 1,000 more subject lines that you can test. The point is not that you can remove the localization and translation process. Those are useful, good things. The point is that the entire process could fundamentally shift and needs to shift to get the real value extracted from these AI systems. My challenge is that if your company is filled with people who are great at process, they will only do what you tell them. You change the process, they'll go do it, and they'll probably be very happy for it. But who in the company is reinventing the process from the ground up? Because again, in the subject line example, none of that needs to happen at all. It's all kind of irrelevant. That entire process probably looks blown up and different. The steps that today are slow become really easy and fast, which means the process needs to accommodate that change. This is the sort of theory of constraints problem. Like, we remove the constraints, the whole process probably needs to shift in order. These systems might be more closed loop than ever before, at least parts of it. So my question back to you then is very, very tactically, if you will. Can you mandate that they go use AI and expect your organization to really get the benefits? Maybe some small ones. I'll acknowledge those. You'll get some small ones if you can identify it, but will you really get the value?
Look, I agree with you on a lot of that. I think the classical idea of governance isn't so much around put in place to drive efficiency and process. I mean, I think companies do that. I think governance is put in place to mitigate risk, right? Like, we don't want people using the tools and then all of a sudden the data leaks out, or we have hallucinations and it causes some harm to our customers or our brand image or something. But And that's what they're trying to prevent. I do think that there's probably a middle ground where there's guardrails, right? And you can put guardrails in place and let people be creative and flexible within those. Like, it's a tricky balance, right? To find. I think that's the right answer on governance, because I agree. You have to be able to, to use your analogy of the email, like, hey, we're going to send out an email campaign and we're going to test, we're going to generate 10 bodies and 10, subject lines. It's like, well, why are you generating a template? Why don't you let the AI generate a personalized email for every single person in the campaign, right? And, don't test any of them and just test the overall outcome of the campaign. Do more people click or less? So I agree with that. And someone should be focused on that, I think, in innovation. We talked about that last time, about making lots of bets and maintaining optionality. But I see that as somewhat different than the governance. Now, how do you design a governance process to put the guardrails and not stop that? Right, that's the key question. You do need to have some of that governance. I do think the governance is almost always over constraining the problem. Like, you can only use this tool. Well, that's silly. Let people use, try different tools, because one may come out that's better. Now, if there's a significant license cost to that tool, all right, well, you don't want to license 5, so maybe we do need to find the one that gets the best, across the most use cases, and that's somewhat of an optimization problem. That's something you can go handle through vendor management, but you still might want to have a small group of people that do have access to other tools for investigative purposes.
Yeah, I love a little bit of the random walk that we're on, right? We knew that we were setting this up for today, and let's call
it a random walk with drift. We're drifting towards the right place.
There, the scientist keeps me. I'm the, I don't know what I am, but you're the scientist, so you got to keep this back. But what I think is interesting around is the emergence of macro themes, right? We're talking about creativity. We're talking about usage. How do we, some things that other buzzwords, but are important. I talk about busyness, but I'll throw some other. What is the purpose? What is the purpose of an organization? What is the purpose of the individual? How does that tie into creativity, learning? How does that tie into equity? And these competing themes, right? Like, I don't know if you go to certain parts of the world under certain types of systems and say, this is where I'm going to go for great creativity and innovation. So how does that play into the core of your culture? And I think that they are competing. And I think that firms are going to have to make individual choices in how you want to work through this. What's encouraging for me, and I even think, using the Netflix example of having this now almost 15 to 20 years of history of looking at this, how is that aged well? Where is it not? How is that initial points of how they took that through great innovation, through those early innings, into how they applied that, and then how do they doing that now in many ways in a race to the bottom when it comes to the expense of what they're trying to do. I think that what intrigues me is that so mandates don't really work. We know that, and we try that. But, it's really around, what do you value? How do you encourage that? Some of this, unfortunately, is not going to be scalable, but it's going to be back to culture. It's going to be, which is really the heart of the Netflix story. It started with culture, who they want it to be. And I think companies have to continue to ask that, and then how that plays in. And then what I hope, and this is my hopeful moment, I really do believe that the creativity that can become from these tools can unlock hidden potential in individuals and companies and ideas. And that's what gets me excited. It's not the fear factor. We talked about that before in the structure. It's really not the usage. And I think that we have to continue as leaders in our organizations, how we advise our clients, is how do you continue to encourage that? And again, is it easy? No. Is it profitable? I believe so, but it's going to be, but more in a longer time frame than the short run. And then, but do I think, is it more enjoyable? Yeah. And I think that's what's kind of intriguing to me, Vincent, when you're raising these questions. And I think individual companies, with some that are going to be 3 friends sitting on a Friday afternoon talking, that are doing something to, some of the largest organizations in the world, like huge different spans of control. Like, I think that how you use this, ultimately going back, now I'm the strategy guy, how does this go back to competitive advantage? How does it go back to differentiation? And I believe that, the this is an area of creativity, whether it be driven by human instinct, whether it be accelerated by machine, whether it be driven by machine, is still what's fun about creating value. And I hope that we continue to do that and see that and avoid, avoid kind of the monotony of just kind of the doing the normal stuff. So anyways, don't answer your question at all, but gave you stuff to respond to.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, look, I do think, to your point, in my mind, where I'm landing is like, this is a very strategic question for organizations today. A bit like the hybrid remote work was, 6 months ago. I think this is the next wave of like really big differentiation. Although I'd argue this one will be even bigger. And I think the core question if you believe in the Netflix thesis of culture is what has made them successful, and to the point, they've been in it for a while and they've made it through some pretty serious disruptive technological changes, from mailing DVDs to streaming to games to creating content themselves, which again, pretty remarkable set of disruptions they've continued to survive. Thrive or not, you can make your own opinion there, but like they've survived all of it. And they're still the dominant player in the space. So there's something they've done right. It's particularly intriguing to me that, if you look at what they've really just tried their best to hire really top-notch people. They pay exceptionally well. They have a lot of sort of elements of that. But the biggest piece to them, Reed Hastings would say, the biggest differentiator for them attracting and retaining those top people is the freedom to go innovate and break the rules conceptually, not literally. And that freedom is what he says is the key to keeping really high talent density. So the other thing I skipped over, one of the pieces in his logic flow, is that as companies get bigger, they have more processes. You add more process, the density of talent decreases. You still have great people, don't get me wrong, but the density, that is the number of great people relative to the total population, will decrease as a function of your size. And his whole thesis, like, if you can maintain that high percentage, and in fact, maybe even increase that percentage, you don't need governance. You give them a lot of freedom and they'll figure it out on their own. And, he does say, to your point, Jason, like, freedom is not absolute. It's a bit like freedom of speech. It's not absolute. There are some cases where you can't allow it, for example, preventing irrevocable disaster. So, misstating your financials during SEC filings, probably something that you have to be very strict and process oriented around, or moral, ethical, legal issues, these kinds of things. But by and large, rapid recovery is what they focus on. So they say, look, everybody's going to mess up. We're just going to acknowledge that we're going to mess up, and we're going to focus on how do we recover from that. Because high performers make few errors to begin with, and they're quick to adapt when they make those errors to recover.
Yeah, but you've got, I agree, but I'm going to throw out another word, another macro thing that's going to get Mr. Chicago booth economist Kevin Erickson all excited. And that word is scarcity, right? Like, it's like, it's the same as saying like, well, pitching matters in baseball. Why don't we just go get all Cy Young award winners as our pitchers? Like, well, because there's not that many of them. Right. There's not 15 out there for you to go get. And, not every company can have all A+ talent, because, you get the top 10% can't work at every single company.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. And this is sort of where I was going to conclude. And that's why I say it's with a random walk with drift, is that where I'm drifting us towards is this sort of core question. Then if you buy into a lot of the logic here and some of the foundational elements, I think it'll be a differentiator. And then the core question becomes, if you're a CEO, or you're the head of people or HR or whatever you want to call that group, whatever the in vogue term is for those teams today, even just a manager, even just a director, like a typical people leader, is now the time that you over-index, overpay for at least a few, as many as you can afford, but at least a few really top-tier people, with the hope, with the expectation, with the belief that those people at this moment in time are going to have an enormously outsized impact because of the nature of who they are. They're just naturally more curious. They're naturally more mavericks, if you will.
Well, maybe I would actually say no, because that's not going to be true. Because, you can take a super high performing person, like the top, performing in 10,000, and put them on a low performing team, and their performance, they don't improve the performance of the team.
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a lot of studies on that, right? And so you know, what's the, Kevin, you're going to have to tell me who said this about, you can't, no business can survive. I think it was Drucker. No business can survive like by only hiring, superheroes because, on average, everybody's average. So some quote like that. But anyway, all right.
Jason,
well, it was Stan Lee before he told Disney.
But no, I mean, I don't think that if you hire like one or two great people and put them in that organization, well, that organization, the rest of the org is going to be constrained, right? I'll throw another sports analogy out there. If like the whole team's playing zone, you get one person playing man to man, it's not going to work out.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, not to keep on tying back themes that we've talked about today and previously, but one thing that'd be cheaper than overpaying is really how do you allow enablement organizations, right? In terms of I think it's unfortunately, we have our highest paid people, or the people that have these gifts and abilities, and we tend to shackle them with other expectations. And so, and we've talked about it from a tech perspective and how do you use, your 20%, 10% time. There's been different techniques that have been tried to allow people to have creativity and innovation, but I would start by how do you find individuals that think differently in your organization? How do you protect them? How do you give them space? How do we, instead of this goes back to where I was talking about before about the busyness and the productivity, I think we squeezed this out of people. And I think that, yes, I'd love to hire more people that have those gifts and abilities and interests, but I think it's also how do you actually enable them more? I mean, you see this frankly in, so there's tons of applications on the technical side, but one that's very near to our heart is around innovation and product and product advancement, right? It's one of the hardest things to justify in what you do within an organization. How do you unleash really, in many ways, idle time to think about how to do it differently and then be able to work through it and really protect that thought process. And then we talked about measurement today too, how do you measure what that looks like and how that plays out? And so I think that's what my, back to some of the hopefulness is how you'd start is how do you protect this? How do you find people that are working through this? And then,
can I just clarify my statement to Vincent when I said, no, that's not going to work?
One, or which one are we clarifying? Yeah.
Well, I'm not suggesting that you don't need to have people that are breaking the rules and innovating things. And I'm just saying that if you don't structure the org to allow that, then just bringing in new people is not going to make, they're going to be stifled in there as the great people already. It's you got to fix those foundational elements. And that's kind of what I meant by that.
I mean, I think that's right. I think I'm aligned with both of you, and this is where I ultimately land. So I'll give you my full vision here then, rather than teasing it.
So he made us talk about this for 45 minutes before he just tells us
he wants the last word, his deal. So he's gonna I'm doing well, good.
Listen, that's how this works. When you're the host, you get to control the conversation, and I make you guys dance like monkeys, and then at the end I look like a hero. No, I'm kidding. Yeah. But
it's just in hosting, or is that and everything else that we work with?
I was about to say.
Well, it's a different conversation. Yeah. No, I think that's where I land ultimately. It's the combination of what you two are saying too. When I think about this, I think you do have to hire these people. I think that you do have to go find them in your organization because people from the outside won't know the constraints and challenges in your org, and those things do matter to some degree. And here's the hardest part: you actually have to let them break the rules. You have to find ways to allow them to actually innovate without all the process. Because back to the point, if you believe that top performers often get effectively stifled and put to the side and frustrated by organizational process-driven companies, then you have to bring out that element of Christensen's, which is you have to create some kind of skunk works team where you say, great, here's a very small number of people. To your point, one person isn't going to change the whole company, but one person or two people in a small team might. Allow them to really innovate. Allow them to do things different. Allow them to not be constrained to the same sort of shareholder primacy, quarterly reporting, metrics, efficiency that you normally have. And just trust that they're going to do something great. Because again, my core belief at this moment, and this is a little bit, maybe it's hyperbolic, but I kind of believe it. I just don't know how convicted I am and how extreme it is. I think most organizations today, if they don't figure out how to innovate, are going to be dead in the next decade. I think generative AI is so disruptive that most companies will fail to innovate, and new upstarts that don't have those constraints will displace a huge chunk of what is on the S&P 500 today or the Fortune 500 today. I think a lot of those companies are going to be disrupted. And so to me, like, this is a bit of an existential crisis for most organizations. And frankly, I think that the risks of not doing it are far greater than the risks of doing it and making mistakes. So now you can react to that. So see, I am nice. I don't make that the last word. You can tell me I'm wrong or you disagree in pieces of it. Feel free.
Go ahead, Jason.
No, I mean, I think it's a little bit extreme to say that they'll be gone in 5 years, but not terribly extreme. I agree. I mean, there's going to be a lot of disruption. I think this is, who are some of the great, and again, I'll show my age a little bit, like who are some of the great technology companies that were around when I started consulting?
Yeah.
Amdahl, DEC, right? And they're not around anymore. The top software company, I think, the year I started consulting was Corel.
Yeah, never.
Corel Draw, right? And
Oh, right. Yeah, I have heard of that. Okay.
Right. And so, yes, they did not innovate. They did not.
And it's not just technology, by the way, right? Like, think of the large industrial players. Like, right. Where are they today? Think of the large telco players. Where are they today? I mean, AT&T's only survived because they got broken up and are kind of reassembled.
They're reassembled. They've all AT&T, Verizon,
right.
Reconstituted into two.
Right. But I just think I really do believe that's where we are with this technology. And it's not one industry. It's not just technology. It's not just telco. It's not just retail. I think it really is everything. The impacts to pharma and finding new proteins, remarkable, insane, crazy. The impacts to new material sciences for battery storage, energy storage technology, incredible. New aerospace technologies, incredible. Technology bits, obviously, incredible. It really is wide-reaching in a way that, I'm younger than you, obviously, but I have some gray hair, so I think it's okay for me to say it. At least in my career, I've never seen something quite as disruptive.
Well, and I just love the hopefulness of these statements. You started this in the thread a second ago around, hey, if you don't adapt, you're going to die. Essentially, you didn't use those words, but that's essentially what you said. And I think that this is where I think it is fun. I mean, the idea of like, can you create? I mean, just even all those different applications, and even though, earlier in this conversation, you're talking about personal productivity, but it's still, the prompting is still the part that's interesting. How you use it, the analysis, what you do with it, how you work through that. And do we actually create this desire to, believe in something? I mean, it sounds so kind of, just hopeful, but believe something bigger than ourselves, have the purpose be what we're doing to drive, how that actually then ties back to real world outcomes and problems and all those things that we're really facing. And I think that comes back to fundamental belief and where your structure is. And I think for me, what's exciting about this is that, like, the gift of time and thinking and creativity and being able to, actually have something that's more meaningful. How do you unleash that in your company? How do you unleash that in your own spheres of control and command? How do we resist kind of the continuation of just the normalization of how we do it? And I think that I think that sometimes it's going to become an individual choice too. Where do you thrive? Where do people thrive? And maybe the technology and some of these elements will allow people to have greater, flexibility and mobility in terms of finding organizations that work through. We get the benefit, the three of us, that, we have great mobility and great flexibility if we choose to. And I think that not everyone has that right. And so I want to be mindful of how that plays out too. But I do think that it is, we've been, at least, and maybe this is a bit biographical from where the journey that we've been on together the last few years, but it's really fun to actually think about creating newness versus just continuing to refine and try to make it better and try to, survive in the moment, whatever stimulus that are coming. And I think that that's what this is about. And I think that with AI, you talk about being a generation into your career, Vincent, or a little less than that, I think this is different. I mean, it is different than, we've talked often about the three or four big technology enhancements from the internet to mobile to cloud to this. And this is fundamentally different in how you do something versus how you just, how you respond or how it accelerates. And it's in the early stages of that. And so I think that's what's, I think that's going to be, I think would be interesting for early companies. How do you how do you really harness this? And it's a change. And so we started with, why don't we have more production? That's where the thread started here way back at the start of this conversation. And I think it really goes back to is it's going to be around leaders that cast a vision and really cast protection and sponsorship of these within your organizations. It's going to require shareholders that are accepting that. It's going to require a broader stakeholder group that's going to allow you to want to do this. A lot of competing things, but you're going to find the bold. If you go back to, the other thing that's thread through this whole conversation is, the idea of Netflix and how it evolved from where it started to where it's at today. That was a bold idea based on human ingenuity and creativity. I think it's a lot of worse things you can do to anchor to that.
I love it. Very inspirational and very hopeful, Kevin. I like it. Jason?
No, I want to let it
just let that sit.
Let that sit.
Okay, well, I'm not going to top it. So Kevin gets the last word today. Thank you guys for joining me. Thanks for our listeners on joining us on this random walk with Drift. It had some purpose. It had some direction, I think, but we kind of meandered around, which is good. That's the point. I think that's the point. This is called technology tangents.
So
have some tangents here and there.
We broke the rules and just let our creativity flow in this.
That's
podcast,
exactly right. I'm just doing what I say. I'm trying to live out what I'm preaching here. So for those that would like to learn more, please visit the insights page at Codera.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us again. Bye-bye.